Well, without any further ado, let me then present Jeff Faux, who will talk about President Trump is leading the country to a major war.
Buenas tardes. And thank you, Cliff, for that introduction, and thanks to the Center for asking me back after 10, 11 years. Jeez, it's a triumph of hope over experience, no doubt. So Cliff says there'll be plenty of room for discussion after my presentation, so hang on, hang in with me. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'll be brief. Woodrow Wilson was once asked how long he took to prepare for a 10-minute speech, and he said a week. And the follow-up question was, well, how long would you prepare for an hour speech? Oh, he said an hour, I'm ready right now. So I'm ready. First thing, before I get into my subject, I just want to share a breaking news that I just got before I put my cell phone to sleep. And it's about the report of the Donald Trump Stamp Commission investigation that has just been released this morning. You might remember that his first act when he was president of the United States was to order a stamp with his face on it, you know, and he wanted it in 24 hours, so the post office had to hurry around and scurry, and they didn't have enough of those self-adhesive stamps, so they used the old kind where you had to moisten it and put it on the letter. And about 2 months afterwards, Trump was getting his morning briefing from Fox News and learned that there was a problem in the stamps sticking to the letters. And so he ordered a media investigation, and the report just came out this morning. Post office said, nothing wrong with the face of the stamp. Nothing wrong with the glue. The problem is people are spitting on the wrong side of the stamp. So with that, I want to start the way I started last year, just so we don't waste time. How many people in this room think that Donald Trump is unfit to be president of the United States? All right, okay, so I can throw away that 4-hour part of the speech. Obviously, the evidence since I was here last January has been piling up that this man is vile, incompetent, perhaps unhinged, or perhaps insane, I don't know. And it was turning my country, his country, into a moral, what he felicitously calls, shithole. Still, we have a spineless Congress, and the chances of impeachment, at least in the short run, are practically nil, and in the long run, not much greater. So his finger is going to be on the nuclear button for the next 3 years, in all probability. It's a prospect, enough to drive all of us nuts, but we should start to think about this as rationally as you can in what's become an irrational world. So I'm going to make 3 major points. One is a few observations on the use of language in this discussion about Trump. Secondly is to not speculate, but to give you some scenarios on how a major war could start. Now I say major war, I use that adjective because of course we've been in wars for a long time. We've been in Iraq for 16 years, we've been in 16 years, and we've been in Afghanistan for 17 years. So we've been at war. You know, the question is what are the probabilities and possibilities of this guy really escalating it? And the third point I want to make is that while Trump is a problem, he is not the fundamental problem. So, first, clarity of thought requires clarity of language. And one of the things that I've observed about the way the newspapers, the Times, the Wall Street Journal, and CNN, etc., the way they talk about Trump is they use the word isolationist. And my first point is that that's absurd. This man is not an isolationist in the sense of being more concerned about the domestic, the country internally than he is externally. He has business interests in 150 companies in 26 countries around the world. He's the embodiment of international capitalism. His populism is phony, as we know. He didn't drain the swamp in Washington. He added to its putrefaction. His advisors come from Wall Street and international corporations, lobbyists. His advisors are full of generals. His relationship with Putin and Russia are a scandal, and may, if we're lucky, bring him down. But who knows? He's added 7 more countries to the countries where the United States has a military presence. That is, troops in those countries. He's cut domestic spending at home. He's raised military spending abroad. He wants more nuclear weapons. He's made the United States more isolated. That's the point I want to make. More isolated in the world, but he is certainly not an isolationist. The danger to the world is opposite. Not that he's inward, but his aggressive egomania and unpredictability has escalated the dangers to the world. And here is the great danger. History tells us that most major wars start not by design, but by errors, usually where you misreading the enemy's intent. The failure to look at the world from the other person's point of view. Now we know we have the universal exemplar of that in the White House. But looking at history, we now know, and the historians have studied the Cold War, we now know that we were several times this close to a major nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. Basically because of the fear on each side that the other would strike first. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, just at the last minute, both Kennedy and Khrushchev looked into the abyss and pulled back. So the danger, even among intelligent people, like Kennedy and Khrushchev, is always there. Donald Trump, who has the attention span of a walnut, and whose Secretary of State is called a moron, is certainly escalates this problem. And if you add the complex technical systems that we have surrounding these nuclear weapons, it gets much worse. Hawaii, as you know, last week had a sudden scare. The state put out an alarm to all of its people that a ballistic missile was coming at Hawaii. Well, it turned out that some clerk just hit the wrong button on a drop-down box. So we can be very, very close to this stuff. So I'm going to provide brief scenarios on how this might happen in the 2 hotspots, most dangerous hotspots in the world. First, North Korea. As we know, North Korea has been developing its missiles that are capable of delivering nuclear warheads. Kim Jong-un is a loudmouth, ruthless dictator. On the other hand, how many U.S. allies are ruthless dictators? We have our own loudmouth to match him, insult for insult. But the story is, in most of the American press, that he's a madman bent on attacking the United States. No serious observer on North Korea, or an expert, thinks that North Korea wants to attack the United States. That would be suicidal. And let me just quote from a New York Times survey of about 2 weeks ago of North Korean experts. Kim, president, head of North Korea, I'm quoting now, has repeatedly proven himself rational and focused on his government's survival. His country's weapons programs are designed to deter a war, not start one. Now, this is not from some left-wing journal. This is from the New York Times survey of conventional standard analysts of North Korea. Well, is he a threat to South Korea? South Korea's got more than twice the population of North Korea, more than 25 times its GDP. It's got a superior armed force. And the Pentagon says, in its own analysis of the Korean Peninsula, that if North Korea invaded South Korea, the North Korean advantage would last 4 days. This is public knowledge. So let's try to look at it from his point of view. His country, his regime, a ruthless regime, is in constant threat from the United States. There are annual joint military exercises with the United States and South Korea, involving tens of thousands of soldiers and sailors, with the exercise aimed at North Korea. There are 3 U.S. carrier groups patrolling the seas around Korea. B-1 bombers fly over it all the time in surveillance. And Trump, several times, one of which was his speech at the United Nations, threatened to destroy North Korea. So, Kim, again, this is all public knowledge, this is not some secret thing that I'm giving you. Kim has offered negotiations. Here's the deal, he said, let's talk about this deal. We'll stop developing nuclear weapons, you stop these military exercises and draw down U.S. troops in South Korea. South Korea and North Korea are already talking. As a matter of fact, the real news, not fake news, this morning was that North and South Korea, in the Olympic Games that are going to be held in South Korea next month, North and South Korea are going to march under the same flag. And it's not a South Korean flag or a North Korean flag. They designed this thing as a Korean flag. So while the South Koreans, who we say we're going to save from the North Koreans, are talking to this ruthless, mad, crazy dictator, we are saying the U.S. position is no talk unless you disarm. We're not going to go to the negotiating table unless you stop your nuclear weapons and destroy your missiles. Kim says, if we disarm, you'll destroy us. Oh, that's ridiculous, right? But in the United States, now why would we ever do that? Well, Kim looks at Saddam Hussein, he looks at Gaddafi in Libya, right? Gaddafi, under pressure, stopped developing nuclear weapons. Within a few years, he was destroyed by European and American aircraft and European and American clandestine operation. He was destroyed, his regime was destroyed, he was killed. And, by the way, it opened the door for Al-Qaeda to come into Libya. So, last week, the word from the White House was that they're using the phrase bloody nose to describe their new policy on North Korea. They're going to give North Korea a bloody nose. Well, maybe he means it, maybe he doesn't. I mean, as we all know, what he says on Tuesday is not what he says on Wednesday, and what he says on Wednesday is not what he says on Thursday. Maybe he doesn't mean it. Maybe that's, New York hotel operators' way of business negotiation. The problem is it sets North Korea on a hair trigger, right? So it's not hard to imagine the scenario. The B-1 bombers that are surveilling North Korea drift over the line, accidentally, in error perhaps. They think, hey, he's been threatening us, this is it. This is the invasion, this is the attack. So they shoot it down. Trump responds with missiles and special ops attacks to take out the nuclear sites in North Korea. Now we know where 30 of them are. And it is said, I mean, I'm no expert on this, but this is what I read from the experts. It's said that there's another 10 to 20 sites in North Korea that are hidden. We don't know where they are. So we send in the missiles, we send in the special rangers and troops and the Green Berets, and maybe we take them all out, maybe we don't. But Kim responds with missiles on Seoul. So the South Korean Air Force attacks. North Koreans respond with troops over the border. US soldiers are killed and captured. Trump sends in more, because he cannot tolerate that. And China, looking across the border at the possibility of the United States now occupying all of North Korea, enters the fray. The Korean War all over again, except this time with a very nuclear-armed China. So, scenario number one. Let's take the other hotspot, Iran. Now, as you know, Obama made a deal with the Iranians. And the deal was kind of like what Kim was suggesting. In this case, it was Iranians would stop developing their nuclear weapons, and we would loosen up the economic embargo that we've had that's been hurting the Iranian economy, including giving them back several $100 million that we just, of their money that we froze in American banks. So that seemed to be working. Enter Trump. His latest comment on this was he's giving them 120 days that we will rip up the treaty unless Iran agrees to new demands from the United States. That ain't going to happen. Trust me on this. Meanwhile, in Iran, there's a revolt of the reformers against the reactionary mullahs that have been running the country. In part, I think, attributed to the fact that they had a deal with the United States, which strengthened the reform movement in Iran. So, here comes Trump, rips up the deal. In response, the hardliners crush the reformers in Iran. They go back to their nuclear program. Trump signals Netanyahu, who has said for the last year, more than a year, that he wants to take out the Iranian missile sites. Trump signals to Netanyahu, okay, let's go get him. So we have a U.S.-Israeli launch on the Iranian nuclear sites. None of these things, spare civilians. None of these things spare people. Civilians killed. The Muslim street around the Middle East erupts. U.S. embassies are attacked by mobs. Missiles from Lebanon and Syria hit Israel. Israel uses tactical nuclear weapons. Pakistan, Muslim country, has nuclear weapons, threatens Israel. Russia comes to Iran's aid. U.S. to Israel's aid. And we got 4 countries in the Middle East with nuclear weapons going at each other. Now, these are scenarios. Don't take all your money out of the bank and do whatever you would do. These are not predictions, but they're scenarios based on the logic of the situation. And maybe we'll be lucky. Maybe none of this will happen. Nobody knows the future. Otto von Bismarck, who was the 19th century German statesman, once said, there is a certain providence in the world, in the universe, I think he said, which protects idiots, drunks, children, and the United States of America. So, maybe we'll be lucky. Maybe. But isn't it time that we asked ourselves, what the hell are we doing in all these places? Why are we having U.S. warships off Korea? And in the South China Sea, off China. Has anyone looked at a map? The South China Sea is actually very close to China. It's like the Caribbean is close to the United States. Imagine Chinese warships patrolling the Caribbean. What our reaction would be. So, why do we say we can't trust Iran at all? They have much more reason not to trust us. You know, in the 1950s, their one democratically elected president was overthrown by the United States CIA. In the war between Iraq and Iran, we supported Iraq, including the use of chemical weapons and cluster bombs against the Iranians. During that war, Our destroyer or cruiser, whatever it was, missile cruiser, in the Persian Gulf, shot down an Iranian civilian passenger plane with 270, 280 civilian passengers, men, women, and children, all dead from a U.S. missile. Never, 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 even under Obama, was there ever an apology for having done that. So if you're asking who should trust whom, the history of this and the experience clearly is the other way. But this is not just about Korea and about Iran. We Americans, have military presence in 144 countries in the world. Now, the New York Times used the number of 179 countries about a week ago, and I don't know where they got that from, so I'm sticking with my more modest 144 countries where U.S. soldiers and military contractors are active. We are if you put those together, by the way, around the world, if you put them together, our military, our soldiers, our Navy, and our military contractors, we have 1 million people outside the United States in a military function around the world. 1 million people. We're by far the largest military spender. We're by far the largest arms merchant. And we've got another $50 billion minimum, because nobody can audit the budget, in the CIA to overthrow elected, unelected officials in countries that we don't like. Huge costs. I'm not going to belabor the numbers on huge costs. Just in the cost of Iraq and Afghanistan, it's cost us so far at least $4 trillion. Trillion dollars. Think about the schools. Think about the hospitals. Think about the infrastructure. Think about the investments needed to deal with global warming. Think about that. Well, you might say, yeah, sure, it's costing us a lot, but there are benefits. So the average citizen asks, okay, so what are the benefits? Well, the first benefit, and this is the list of what the citizen gets in the few cases where they're interested in asking the question. First one is, of course, protecting Americans. The actual threat coming from the areas where 144 countries have an American military presence, the actual threat to the United States of America is zero. We are by far the most powerful military nation in the world. There is no threat to us. None comes near. Well, what about the terrorists? What about 9/11? George Bush said they attacked us at 9/11 because they hate our democracy and our freedom. So Obama bin Laden was asked a number of times, so why did he do this? And he said, well, if we were going to attack Western countries because of their freedom and democracy, why didn't we go after Sweden or Norway or Denmark, right? Why did we go after the United States of America? And he gave two reasons. There were 40,000 troops in Saudi Arabia, and he's a member of the Saudi Arabian, was a member of the Saudi Arabian aristocracy. 40,000 American troops in Saudi Arabia. And the U.S. support for the Israeli settlements and the Israeli strategy of destroying the Palestinians in the West Bank. So, you may agree with that or not. You may be for 40,000 troops in Saudi Arabia. You may be for the Israeli policy. But don't kid yourself. That's why we had San Bernardino. That's why we had Orlando. That's why we had the Boston Marathon. That's why we had that guy who drove the van into those people in New York a few months ago. And they all say it. Their last words on Facebook before they, committed suicide was, we're doing it because the U.S. is destroying our country back there. Again, you may think that's a good idea that we're there, but that's the price that we're paying. And we should not kid ourselves that as long as we're there, They're going to be over here. So, what about defending freedom and democracy, to use George Bush's words, in other places? Well, we support dozens of dictators around the world, helping them suppress democracy in their own countries. The last few years we've clearly, publicly admitted the coup against the elected government of Ukraine and in Honduras. So, okay, we're not defending exactly democracy in those other countries. Well, peace and order would be the next one. We have to, somebody's got to keep peace and order in the world. And who else but us? Who else has the goodwill? Who else has the ability to do it? To be the world's policeman? Well, we have invaded or bombed 14 different Muslim countries since 1980. The world policeman. We've been, as I say, at war in the Middle East for 17 years. Created chaos where there was a lot of unpleasantness, but there was order. We created ISIS. As far as rule of law, ask yourself, why hasn't the United States signed the International Treaty Against Chemical Weapons? Why hasn't the United States signed the International Treaty Against Mining? Why hasn't the United States signed up for the law of the sea? Why aren't we members of the International Court? Shouldn't the world's policemen be signing up on all those things? Well, you know, okay, you may be right about that, but what about the oil? Right? We went into the Middle East for oil. Isn't that a good reason? Well, think about it. It's, whose oil is it? Since Jimmy Carter, and I'm not talking about, you know, laying this on Bush. Since Jimmy Carter, the policy of the United States of America is that the oil that's underneath the ground in the Middle East belongs to us. Now, imagine the Chinese saying, you know, the natural gas in the United States belongs to us. So what right do we have for this oil? Well, forget morality. The fact is, we no longer even need it. We're still there, but we don't need the oil. The United States is practically self-sufficient in oil, thanks to fracking and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But, and if the United States and North America is already self-sufficient. So why are we still there if it was about oil? Well, you know, the last part of this argument is, well, okay, everything you say, yeah, okay. But we do more good than bad in the world. Right? We build hospitals. We help people build schools. We send the Peace Corps out there to educate people. So what's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that, but you don't need 1 million people out there under arms in the world in order to do it. Canada does it without doing that. They build hospitals. You know, they do build schools in other countries. Sweden does it. France does it. Why do we need to dominate the world in order to build a few hospitals for poor, wretched people? You know, there's a scientific, there's a principle of logic called Occam's razor. And when you look at a problem, the answer to the problem is always the one that explains it as simply as possible. And the only credible explanation for what I've just described is, again, it's about language, is contained in words that you never hear. You never hear on CNN, certainly not Fox News. You never see in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or the LA Times. Empire, imperialism applied to the United States. Someone publicly uses those words, immediately dismissed as a left-wing crank, as a hater of America, blah, blah, blah. And yet, using the principle of Occam's razor, the clearest, simplest explanation, because none of the other stuff works, is we're there because it's the interests of the U.S. governing class, economic and political interests, to dominate every corner of the world. And the result, again, going back to the idea of how other people see us, putting yourself in somebody else's position. The Pew Charitable Trust does these world surveys periodically. And the one they took in 2014, I think it was 14 or 13, when Obama was still president, showed that it was a survey of about 55, 58 countries. And the question was, what country is the most danger to world peace? Guess. 65% of the respondents said the United States of America. In second place, way behind, was Pakistan. So Trump is a problem. As, you know, I don't want to deter from that in your mind or distract from it. But he's not the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is the assumption that the United States has the right to impose its will on the rest of the world in the name of saving it from bad hombres. And of course, it's always, you look at any aggressive country or dictator or whatever in the world, in history, and it's always for some good cause. So our good cause is we're saving it from the bad hombres. Now, the history of this is that we can't tell the good hombres from the bad hombres. That was a legitimate claim. From Vietnam to Iraq and everything in between, everything before and after. Who are the bad guys and who are the good guys? It's always us picking up some clown in some country and saying, this is our guy. Noriega in Panama, Saddam Hussein. I mean, the list goes on and on. These were our guys until they weren't our guys. There's no end to the number of bad hombres on both sides of any conflict around the world. Is Saudi Arabia, our ally, morally superior to Iran, our enemy? Does it matter to the average American citizen whether Shia or Sunni is the best interpretation of the Koran? What tribe should run Somalia? Which thug should be president of Ukraine? Our thug or their thug? Is it so important? Is it so important that Saudi Arabia control Yemen? That we're sending missiles there to kill the children? This was not the vision on which I think my country, the American Republic, was created. At the very beginning, Jefferson and Washington warned against entangling alliances in the world. We have, by the way, 69 treaties which says that the United States will come to the defense of a country that's attacked by another country, as long as it's not being attacked by the United States. 69 places in the world. Americans can't even find these places on a map. It was not the vision that created this country. John Quincy Adams said once, he warned against Americans going into the world seeking monsters to destroy. Well, we've been ignoring that for the last 100 years. And by chasing monsters, by seeking them and chasing them down, we have become one. When you create an empire, sooner or later you're going to get a crackpot for an emperor. Trump is our Nero. But the problem wasn't just Nero. The problem was the empire that was created and given to him to use as he wanted. Well, you know, this, not to worry, say some people, and this is a point often an op-ed in the mainstream press. Cooler heads will prevail. Cooler heads in the military will stop Trump from doing something really crazy. Well, it's true that the Military Code of Justice says that it's legal for a military soldier to refuse to obey an illegal order. The problem is that bombing the hell out of North Korea or Iran or any place else in the world is not an illegal order. The U.S. Congress has long abandoned its responsibility over the Congress. I mean, over its constitutional responsibility to be the place where war is declared. That's gone. They've abandoned it. Under Democrats as well as Republicans. And think about this argument, by the way, that cooler heads in the military will prevail and prevent Trump from doing something stupid. Now, we don't like to believe that's true, but think about it. Do we really want a situation, do we really want to set a precedent where the U.S. military can overturn a decision by an elected president? So, do we really want that? So to the trillions that we have squandered on arms that could have been spent on a lot better things, add the costs of all this, the damage to our democracy and the damage to our own political souls. Militarism gradually, slowly but surely over the last 25 years, pervades the American culture. The public has been infantilized by TV, by video games, by movies. The military today, while all other institutions in the American political economy are undergoing a major disrespect by the American population, clean up the swamp in Washington. But no matter what the institution, whether it's a church or a labor union or a corporation, or what, universities, they all have less respect than they used to, except one, and that's the military. The military is the most admired institution in American culture. Now, in part, it's because of, by the way, this is an aside, it's a footnote, but there's a very easy read, humorous, and devastating book about the impact of the military on sports culture. It's called Billy Lynn's Halftime Walk. Anyway, I don't know who the author is, but it's an easy read. It's humorous and it's devastating in showing how sports in America is used to cultivate a militarist mindset. So in part, it's the face. You get, I'm a baseball fan, so I go to a lot of my baseball games in the summertime. And it's always in the seventh inning. There's a half a dozen young soldiers that they bring out and everybody claps. And they're 19, 20-year-olds, right? I mean, they're wanting to sacrifice themselves for their country. How can you not feel for these people? And how can you not know in the back of your mind they're being used in order to gin up this sentiment? And in part, by the way, given, there's the blur between domestic policy and foreign policy, in part it's because the upward mobility of young people who can't afford to go to college has been cut off in its traditional civilian areas. Used to be, you could get a middle-class life by working in a factory. Gone. Used to be, you could get a middle-class life by working in government health and social welfare agencies. That's being shrunk to the point where it's gone. So, where's the only place? If you graduated from high school and you're 18 years old and you're in, one of those counties in Wisconsin or Michigan that surprisingly turned out to vote for Trump, the best option you have is to join the military. So no wonder it's popular. All right, now I'm going to give you the most shocking statistic, and I'm a nerd at this stuff, the most shocking statistics that I've come across in the last 2 years. It's a Harvard study, Harvard surveys. In 1994, they found out that 1 out of 16 Americans thought it was a good idea for the military to run the country. 1994. 2014, it was 1 out of 6. Think about that. 1 out of 6 Americans say it would be better if the military ran the country. So here I am, you know, like the character in the Woody Allen film years ago, where the preacher is preaching to the congregation, and he says, on the one hand, we have inevitable disaster. On the other hand, we have sure catastrophe. Let us pray that we have the wisdom to choose between them. Well, Trump is a wake-up call. A wake-up call about our democracy. Not just where we spend our money, but our democracy. And I won't go, you know, give you my other hour speech about what's happening to the middle class. You can get that on jefffaux.com. But it's clear that his election, remember he lost the election, right? We know that. Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes. And he won the election in 5 states, we'll just take 4 of them, that were considered, Midwestern states, that were considered the fireproof states for Democrats. Up until the close of election on November 8th, 2016, everyone, including me, were sure that she would win those states because they voted for Obama once, they voted for Obama twice, and they voted for Trump. And he got those votes exactly in those areas where the Democrats for 25 years have been ignoring what's going on to their working class. His election was a pushback on that. And in turn, of course, then he released the demons of racism, sexism, meanness, and jingoism that, you know, to be honest, always lie a little below the surface in the human heart. And the point of politics is to keep them below the surface. And what Trump, our Nero, has done, has released it. So, as I said, when at the beginning, the Republican Congress is never going to impeach this guy. He rescued the Republicans from the dead. When those polls closed, people were thinking, oh, it's the end of the Republican Party, they'll go down with Trump. And, you know, plus, many of these people are not so nice people, but that's another question. But now here we are, and it's not a pretty picture. And the first step, obviously, is to deal with the acute problem, that is Trump. And if he's not going to be impeached, the only other way we have is to make sure that in November we've got a Congress, a Democratic Congress, that can restrain him. Democrats need 24 House seats, pick up of 24 House seats, 2 Senate seats. It's not easy for a lot of reasons about redistricting and the number of Democrats who are up for re-election. Moreover, Trump is not on the ballot. So it's a district by district fight. So if you're an American here, contribute, work the phones, go door to door, do whatever you can this election. Do whatever you can to make sure we have some check on this deranged president. If you're not an American, make sure all your American friends get to the polls. Or pray to the Virgin of Guadalupe for us.